Hi, I'm James Kirby, Managing Editor of Eureka Report, and today I'm talking to Max Newnham. You might know Max because he writes every Friday in Eureka Report, and today I want to talk to him about DIY funds and property in DIY funds and the issues and indeed the tax issues around doing that. Hi Max.
Hi James.
I want to talk about DIY funds, but we're looking at property inside DIY funds. The first thing I think we must clarify for everybody is it was always the case you could have property in a DIY fund, but it was very restricted, wasn't it?
Yes, DIY funds, self-managed super funds, are restricted in some cases. One of the things is they can't buy assets from members. One of the few exceptions is commercial property. So forever, super funds have been able to buy commercial property.
But even more than that, you couldn't
gear anything.
You couldn't gear it, which is a very big point, right? You couldn't have a mortgage. You had to buy the whole property
exactly.
on your own money, basically.
Until about 2 or 3 years ago, super funds had to have all of the money in a super fund to pay for the property, or they could joint venture, and that you can still joint venture today.
Yep.
There was lots of other mechanisms, unit trusts. As long as the property that was being purchased, either wholly or partly by the super fund, didn't have a mortgage over it, you were able to buy it. But there's been the big change.
So for instance, I and a unit trust could joint venture together. The unit trust could have some equity in the property, but I'd be paying the mortgage as an individual. That was the old way with unit trusts.
That's a that goes back to before the turn of the millennium, is that they really tightened up, that it really got to the point where a super fund could not invest in a property if it had a mortgage over it.
Yes, and now the big breakthrough is that a super fund can invest in and it can take out a mortgage, but it's still restricted, isn't it? You have to go through certain products.
You have to set up what effectively another trust, and what happens is the trust effectively holds the property. The super fund enters into an agreement with that trust, and the super fund can borrow pretty much what it likes against that. There's no restrictions.
And how does it work? I mean, is it good? Do you think it's worth doing? It sounds like trouble. It sounds a bit complicated for many people, but is it worth doing?
Each investment must be assessed on its own merits. In some cases, it could be worthwhile, and it also depends at what stage of life, superannuation life, the super fund is in.
But it allows someone with this DIY super fund to gear up and mortgage a property, which was never possible before.
Yes, but I'd really counsel on the wisdom of it. If you're going to gear into a property, why would you be using a vehicle that's getting a tax deduction at 15%, when if you did it in your personal hands, you could be getting a benefit of it 38 or 45 or even 34%?
Well, I suppose the main reason people would do it is because they don't have the deposit for the house, so they use funds inside the DIY fund as the deposit, as the 10% down on the house or the property of any description.
It can work. In the end, it ends up being a long investment, especially if it's domestic residential property. Very poor income returns. You're going for growth. So therefore, as long as you're buying well, it can work out. But you can actually create a rod for the back if the gearing loss is too great, because the only way that the cash flow can be balanced is by making extra contributions. Now, effectively, that means someone's super contributions are being funneled into a property rather than increasing their superannuation benefits.
Okay, and I suppose there's a risk also. There's no such thing as a little property. You have to spend a lot on a property. So the risk obviously is allocation, that people might have too much of the super fund in property.
Definitely, and it becomes a problem when people get to their retirement phase, because especially if it's a residential property, you're lucky if you get a net 2.5% to 3% return.
And what would you expect on a good commercial one?
Oh, 7 or 8%, 9% it can be. I mean,
do you recommend commercial over residential?
Again, it's hard to make those.
Do you find yourself recommending commercial over residential? You do.
But then the trouble is sometimes you have to have a lot more money in the super fund to be able to do that.
Okay. Well, we might leave it at that, Max. Thank you very much for those insights. I think for most people, the issue is on property. You can do it. You can now have a mortgage in your super fund consider the allocation of your fund, that you don't have too much in property, and indeed the balance between commercial and residential, because commercial may actually be more suitable in a DIY fund. Thank you.